The 2001 barrier just became the new normal at gas stations across Korea, and the climb isn't over yet. For the fifth straight week, prices have pushed higher, gasoline now averaging 2008.61 per liter nationwide, diesel at 2002.8. In Seoul, drivers are paying even more, over 2047 won to fill up. Every trip to the pump costs a bit more than the last, and the pattern points to something far bigger than seasonal fluctuations or local market tweaks. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The price creep at Korean gas stations is the visible end of a supply chain that runs through one of the most contested waterways on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, that narrow passage between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, the route through which roughly one-fifth of the world's oil moves every day, is effectively blocked. The United States has imposed a naval blockade on Iranian oil exports, and Iran has responded by shutting down nearly all commercial tanker traffic through the strait. The result is a standoff that has sent global oil prices soaring past $126 a barrel, the highest level since 2022, and triggered what President Trump called a crisis that could last months. For South Korea, that blockade hits harder than almost anywhere else. The country imports more than 70% of its oil and gas from the Middle East, and 61% of its crude oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. With very few natural resources of its own, Korea depends almost entirely on these imports to keep its economy running, powering factories, heating homes, and filling the tanks of millions of commuters. When the strait closes, the entire fuel supply tightens, and prices adjust accordingly. The Korean government has been scrambling to secure alternate supply routes. In mid-April, officials announced they had locked in 273 million barrels of crude from the Middle East and Kazakhstan, bypassing Hormuz entirely by routing shipments through longer, more expensive channels. But those deals haven't been enough to offset the disruption. March crude imports fell to 2.49 million barrels per day, the lowest since August 2023, as tankers that once sailed freely through the strait were forced to take longer routes or sit idle. The gap between what Korea needs and what it can reliably source has widened, and fuel wholesalers have passed those costs down the line. Meanwhile, the broader oil market remains on edge. Traders are watching every signal from Washington and Tehran, trying to predict whether the blockade will ease or escalate. Trump's recent comments suggest he's willing to keep up the pressure, even hinting at the possibility of seizing Iranian oil outright. Iran, for its part, has offered to reopen the strait only if the U.S. lifts its blockade and the conflict ends, a proposal the White House has shown no interest in accepting. The standoff has already triggered billions of dollars in legal disputes among oil traders, as contracts written before the crisis now confront force majeure clauses and conflicting interpretations of who owes what. Back in Korea, the weekly price increases have started to feel inevitable. The Korea National Oil Corporation tracks fuel prices through its OPNET system, and the data shows a steady upward march that began in early April and hasn't reversed. Some regions have seen sharper jumps than others. Seoul, with its dense traffic and higher overhead, crossed the 2001 threshold before the rest of the country, but the trend is uniform. Even government measures like temporary fuel tax cuts and price cap systems have only slowed the rise, not stopped it. What makes this moment different from past oil shocks is the uncertainty around duration. During previous crises, markets could usually price in a timeline: sanctions would lift, production would ramp up, or strategic reserves would be released. This time, the timeline is open-ended. The blockade isn't tied to a specific negotiation or a clear off-ramp. It's a tool of coercion in a larger geopolitical contest, and neither side has shown any willingness to back down. That means Korean drivers filling up today have no reason to expect relief next week, or the week after. The ripple effects are already spreading beyond the pump. higher fuel costs push up transportation expenses, which in turn raise the price of goods that need to be moved: food, consumer products, raw materials for manufacturing. Inflation, which had been cooling in Korea through late 2025, is now under renewed pressure. Households that had adjusted to one price level are now recalculating their budgets week by week, unsure when the floor will hold. And the question looming over all of this: what happens if the blockade doesn't end soon? Korea's alternate supply routes can't fully replace what used to flow through Hormuz, and the longer the disruption lasts, the more strain it puts on an import-dependent economy. The 5-week climb in gas prices isn't just a number on a sign, it's a signal of how quickly a distant geopolitical crisis can reshape everyday life for millions of people who never asked to be part of it.